Argentina's risk premium, which is the price that investors charge to hold its debt, increased exponentially. So every day that the peso goes down, the portfolios that hold those bonds are just bleeding money. What that means then is some very powerful people are losing a lot of money. But now fast forward to July 2025. Out of nowhere, the US Treasury steps in and says, don't worry guys, we got you. We're gonna stabilize your currency without congressional approval. We're gonna use the ESF mechanism, right?
We'll begin with the investors, big funds, some run by veterans of famed trading houses, who bought Argentina's sovereign debt when the market had already priced near certain default. Those bonds traded at pennies on the dollar in the textbook realm of distressed debt. The wager was simple in theory. Elect a reform-minded leader / wasteful spending, restore confidence, and watch those distressed paper holdings rebound to full value.
So here's how some very powerful people placed bets on Argentina. These are just a few of them, and I have to be very careful here for obvious reasons, so this is for entertainment and research purposes only, but you can verify all of this yourself. There's at least two big funds that we know of. Funds like Discovery Capital, which was founded by Robert Citron, and Soros Fund Management. But where it gets interesting is that the current US Treasury used to work under George Soros at the Quantum Fund, where he managed billions of dollars and worked with the same people who run these funds and have deep investment interests in Argentina's economy. So the person who's now running the Treasury, the one who's approving this entire $40 billion deal, is the same person who spent decades making money from these types of trades. Now, that doesn't mean anything illegal is happening, but I think it's an interesting coincidence that's at least worth mentioning, because a lot of those funds bought billions of dollars worth of Argentina's bonds that were already trading as what's called distressed debt. By the way, distressed debt just means any kind of bond that trades below 70 cents on the dollar. It's kind of a polite way of saying the market thinks you might never get your money back. High chance of default. And Argentina's 2035 and 2041 sovereign bonds, which makes up most of what Wall Street holds, have been trading as low as 25 to 35 cents on the dollar in 2024 and 2025. That is deep distressed. That's most likely you are definitely not getting your money back. So they made a bet. And the bet was that the new president, Javier Milei, could come in and fix Argentina's economy by cutting out unnecessary spending. Remember all those videos way back in the day? It's about taking that chainsaw to government bloat and removing all of it. And if he could fix the economy, that would make Argentina's bonds valuable again. But that didn't end up happening, right? Inflation stayed above 200%, the peso has kept collapsing, and those same bonds have fallen more than 30%. Argentina's risk premium, which is the price that investors charge to hold its debt, increased exponentially. So every day that the peso goes down, the portfolios that hold those bonds are just bleeding money. What that means then is some very powerful people are losing a lot of money. But now fast forward to July 2025. Out of nowhere, the US Treasury steps in and says, don't worry guys, we got you. We're gonna stabilize your currency without congressional approval. We're gonna use the ESF mechanism, right? And yeah, that helps secure a potentially strategic partner. But as a side effect, it also happens to save billions of dollars for the exact funds and people that placed those bets on the recovery that never ended up happening. At least not organically. And because the official story doesn't tell us that this is a bailout, that's not the framing, no one can really criticize it as market intervention. But behaviorally, it looks like one. The money is coming from the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which remember, sits inside the Treasury. So if those pesos lose value, which they are, it's the Treasury that takes the hit. And when the Treasury takes the hit, that shortfall gets filled with new debt. new debt that taxpayers ultimately repay. And this actually has had real negative consequences on people like US farmers. They're struggling because of costs and drought conditions and grain and beef prices. In other words, on a practical level, we are subsidizing private investors and our competitors. So this is where a lot of people have that problem with what's happening, because it also sets a very bad example. The US government is now publicly saving billionaire investors who made bets that went bad. So then if this becomes the model, doesn't it tell other hedge funds that the US can save you as long as you can, work out a backdoor deal, and it can just be reframed as, we're going to defend the dollar, right? We're going to defend American values. But the reality is that the US is already running multi-trillion-dollar deficits. We're borrowing to fund programs, and somehow we're supposed to have an extra $40 billion laying around to gamble on another country's hyper-inflated currency. So that doesn't make much sense. But let me just tie it all together and explain how this story is part of a much bigger picture. Because yes, this definitely helps Argentina. And it definitely helps the billionaire friends of this administration. But I don't think it's just about Argentina. It's also about the US fighting its war with China over the idea of what money should look like in the future. Because think about what's happening. China's getting ready to build its gold corridor, right? The node of vaults across Asia, Africa, Latin America. And they're literally creating a parallel financial system backed by their economy with the money that's redeemable for gold. And the US has also been doing kind of the same thing, but in reverse. So this bailout of Argentina, I don't think is some random act of charity, right? It's not altruism, and the president's not doing it just to be nice. He's doing it because it's supposed to telegraph to the world that the US still has that power to stabilize economies whenever it wants. China might be lending in yuan backed by gold. The US is now lending dollars backed by treasuries, right? And Argentina is sort of this test case scenario because it's the one Latin American country that's been slowly getting closer and closer to China. Because over the last few years, China's banks have lent Argentina billions of dollars to build things like power plants and railways and nuclear projects. They've been trying to pull Argentina into their sphere of influence, if you will, just like they've done with dozens of other countries across Africa and Asia. So the US is like, whoa, hold on a minute, you guys are becoming too close of friends. We're like, we'll lend you $40 billion if you need. And that's to block China's influence and its play to keep Latin America in the dollar system. And if it works, if Argentina can stabilize, which seems to be totally conditional on Javier Milei's re-election, because President Trump said if he does not get re-elected, the US won't support him.
I'm with this man because his philosophy is correct. And he may win and he may not win, but I think he's going to win. And if he wins, we're staying with him, and if he doesn't win, we're gone.
But if he does win, and if it works, I think we're going to see this strategy play out again and again, but with other countries. There's already rumors that other currency stabilization partnerships could be next for countries like Brazil, very important, Colombia, Egypt, Kenya.
The Obama administration missed a big opportunity in the 8 years he was in, as many Latin American governments went center-right. So we are seeing Argentina, Paraguay, Ecuador, Bolivia.
Countries that have all taken huge amounts of infrastructure loans from China that are now drowning in debt. Like Brazil, for example, owes tens of billions to China's state banks through the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's already part of BRICS, right? Colombia's peso has fallen over 20% last year, and it's facing serious inflation pressure. Egypt, which is one of China's biggest borrowers in Africa, is also on the verge of another IMF rescue. These are exactly the kind of candidate countries where the US could step in and try this out with. And remember, this is not the first time this has happened. Like I said, it's happened before in 1995 when we bailed out Mexico, right? For the similar reasons, to keep it from falling into financial chaos that could have spilt over into the US. But this time it's a little different because back then, the world was still on the dollar standard. but now that's changing. And the US is playing offensive defense, if you will. It also just happens to benefit some of the wealthiest people in the world, like Discovery Capital, which is one of the biggest holders of Argentina's debt, run by a former Soros fund manager, and the current Secretary of Treasury, who also worked under George Soros, running billions at the same company. That's all just kind of a side added benefit, which I'm sure has nothing to do with this. I'd love to know what you think, though. As always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to see you back here next week. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Do we treat interventions as necessary defenses of global stability? Or do we call them what they sometimes resemble? Private rescues paid for by public balance sheets? The truth may be both. Drop a comment with your view. Strategic necessity or baked-in bailout? If you found this breakdown useful, smash the like button, subscribe for more deep dive explainers, and I'll see you next week with another episode that follows money where it leads